What's up, guys? Welcome to the very first DC Dual Force meta report. Here I'm going to showcase a few decks that more than likely you're going to be seeing on the ladder more than anything else. So these are going to be the decks that probably have been on the ladder in the last few weeks. Now, of course, I will disclaimer this that right now there are several cards that are bugged and several other bugs that have been happening that has phased maybe some of these in the last day or so to where they haven't been as prevalent because of these issues. But I'm sure once these bugs are fixed, you're definitely going to be seeing them resurge back in the ladder, which I will kind of talk about those in more detail when they show up. But one thing I will say is this is a very diverse meta. Now with the nerfs to energy and a few other buffs to tyranny, you will definitely be seeing a lot more decks in this meta than you have probably ever before. So these decks that I'm showcasing, of course, I'm sure you're going to be coming in the comments and be like, oh, I've seen this deck and I've seen this deck. Trust me, I've seen a lot more than just these, but I will say predominantly you probably see these a lot more than others. So I have a few decks here we're going to go over, and the biggest thing is I'm not going to really say like, oh, if this deck shows up, then you need to have this deck A, B, and C in order to defeat it. More so, I'm going to kind of talk about it, see what its strengths are, maybe talk about a little bit of its weaknesses, but the biggest thing that I think will be helpful for you is kind of steer you towards the first leader you probably should be taking out against so-and-so deck. So without further ado, let's start with the very first one. Now, probably the biggest deck that you more than likely have seen a lot of right now is gotta be Batman and Aquaman. Disclaimer, for these decks, I'm going to be showcasing them on the website Dual Force HQ. If you have not checked out this website, it is a website that actually has a lot of good information as far as info as card games in general, thanks to Obijohn from the community, as well as a few decks that you can actually look at and see some videos tied to so-and-so decks. All these decks, you will find the description, or at least the deck code in the descriptions down below, as well as this website where you can kind of get tied back to this video. A lot of these decks are basically going to be the average of the deck. So definitely, if you do want to take these decks, have your own spin on them. Add in cards, subtract cards, whatever you want to do. So like I said, first off, Batman, Aquaman. Now, this one has actually become a resurgence in the last few weeks. I believe it is mainly due to the fact of Yara Flora. Yara Flora is a card that, as it says, gets reduced when you have 5 attack friendly units on the board. Now, the key to this is that even when it's reduced, like Paco, it's still considered a gold card. Now, I very much believe this is intended to be so. It does not appear to be like, oh, a bug and a workaround type deal. It seems like it's supposed to be like that. So once it was found that Yara actually works with cards like Old School Blue Beetle, Jamie Reyes, it kind of opened up that, oh, I don't just have to wait around and maybe get my Paco or maybe wait until the gold round to hit these cards up. Yara kind of does sometimes a very cheaper way to actually get this done. And a lot of times in like the silver rounds, you might be able to use her and kind of explode with Jamie and or Blue Beetle to get those leader charges quicker than normal. Now, of course, we all know that you got the basic might package as well as attackers package. When facing this deck, I would probably, depending how the game goes, I will probably gear myself to taking out Batman first. There's a few reasons for that. One, Batman is going to be the one that's going to be striking you more often than Aquaman, as well as the gadgets generation can bring a lot of versatility to your opponent to kind of strike or tear gas or a lot of different things. The biggest culprit, especially if you see your opponent using a lot more gadgets, like they probably gear the deck more gadget focused than normal, I definitely would go for Batman because the biggest issue is going to be the Batmobile at the very end. If you can get rid of Batman before Batmobile becomes a contender, that will actually set the stage where you can focus more on Aquaman and clear out the game. Now, it wouldn't be a meta report if we didn't discuss the next deck, Doomsday and Flash. This is going to be your basic aggro burn version of it. This deck, surprisingly enough, has gone through a lot of iterations. We've had times where they've had Earthquake. We've had times where they had Cupid and then they didn't have Cupid. Like, just because you see this deck list right here doesn't mean that you can't fit your own little spin on things. But for the most part, this is what they do. They are all aggro, all face, little control, to its detriment sometimes, because sometimes some people might pilot this deck a little too hard to the face and thus end up losing the game. Now, the key is for this deck, it was very, very prevalent several weeks ago. Like, it was on the meta and almost like half the meta was playing aggro, especially to climb up the ranks. Now it's still on the meta, but definitely not as fearsome as it was before, with several nerfs to things like Hellblaze, and I believe at one point this deck even had Flashpoint, some iterations, but that is gone as well. So be very careful when seeing this deck. My advice is to go for Flash first and then go for Doomsday. Mainly for the fact that Flash's versatility and using health as a resource to try to get rid of your, a lot of times, low health units, and then sometimes they can actually bring a little surprise to things with Power Surge. For those that don't know, Power Surge allows them to add a 3 attack to Flash. So in essence, Flash becomes, instead of attacking for 2 attack each time, he now is able to attack for 5 attack each time, thus bringing a total of 10 damage, which can be very surprising when you think you have this very healthy unit guarding your leader, and the next thing you know, they come with Power Surge and able to clear things out. So thus, target Flash first, get rid of him, and then when they're only able to really attack with Doomsday, unless they have burn from hand and actions to be able to go through your units, if you're able to establish a clear board and able to protect your leaders, then you can thus win the game. But be very careful, especially for those that are running Bizarro, because Bizarro, when you think you're safe, he can definitely flip the script and allow them to do the Doomsday damage on your leader's face. So just when you think you might be ahead, do not sit there and think that, oh, this is going to be a dub for me. Definitely pay attention to what your opponents may have, so then that way, from start to finish, you can actually get the win. And sometimes your opponent just has everything and there's nothing you can do. That does happen. But like I said, the good thing is this one is not as prevalent on the ladder as much, so it's actually very manageable now in comparison to the past. Now, as we transition from Flash Doomsday, we come to this deck that was one of the big culprits that hurts Flash and Doomsday, which is mono red, specifically Aquaman and Wonder Woman. Now this deck, of course, as your regular mono red, you more than likely are going to definitely see this on the ladder more so than anything else. Mono red specializes in getting those big, beefy units on the board and keeping them on the board. So then that way, they're always a problem no matter what you do. They have high health and you basically secure victory from your units. Now, for those that don't know, the most glaring weakness of mono red is the fact that they don't run a whole lot of actions. And because they don't have a whole lot of actions, they can lose very, very hard through things like control decks or things that might be more heavily geared towards actions, because as they keep placing these units on the board, if you're able to get value from your actions to clear out multiple units, then over time, they end up not having a board. And the biggest weakness of mono red is if you lose the board, you pretty much lose the game, because it's kind of hard to build those units back up in order to secure your own victory. Because as you use your actions to kill the mono red units, they try to build their board back up while your board is still sitting there having, you know, nice, fine, happy day. And then a lot of times you're able to sweep through. But to combat that, we've been having some very colorful and very interesting cards being introduced in mono red. I.e., one of the most weird resurgences, I will have to say, is gotta be Highfather. Now, Highfather, especially at the end game, costs you a lot, but he is very hard to kill if you're not prepared for him and if you do not see him. So you have your opponent might be putting down Highfather, and even if you're able to use a lot of resources to kill Highfather, there's also the problem of Superman. Here's another big beefy unit that you might have to like trade some things in, use some actions to deal with. So you end up using a lot of your resources to kill this one unit. So these big strong units end up going 2 for 1, 3 for 1. There's been some surprises with supersize, whether it's supersize in the late game, mid game, where a unit that you're like, oh, it's perfectly fine, I can deal with it next turn, and then bam, they come down with a supersize, and you're kind of looking for an answer from there. So there have been very interesting surprises here and there out of mono red, and if you're not prepared for it, you can basically just end up losing from one big strong unit that you just can't answer. Even though you might have been dominating the whole game, at the very end, they just place this big unit and then you have nothing you can do about it and end up just losing. So definitely pay attention to what they may have or what they may surprise you with. Against mono red, like I said before, you want to try to clear the board as much as possible. The more that you clear the board, then they will have less cards that they can have. And a lot of the times your mono red opponent is going to end up being in almost a top deck situation while you might still have a few cards in your hand. Between these two, I would definitely go for Wonder Woman first. Yet again, we have a hero or leader in this case that attacks on 2 charges and of course buffing some cards. Now this one is not as cut and dry as some other ones. If during the course of the game you have Aquaman that ends up for some reason being lower health than Wonder Woman, by all means go for him first. The key is, of course, try to get rid of one of these leaders as quickly as possible. But all things being equal, I'm more than likely would go for Wonder Woman versus Aquaman. So then that way, they're not able to buff cards up and they're not able to bring out some units that can protect either of these leaders. And that way you can focus on one at a time. And by the end, if they don't have a board, don't have a way to fight back, and then you are able to defeat them from your board and or actions that you still have in your hand. So this deck is probably one of the most artistic decks I can say. This is your canvas with which you can paint it however you like. There is a lot of different iterations on this deck. Now, Poison Ivy, Zatanna, very popular, thanks in part to the new cards that have come into the game, i.e. and specifically Morgan Le Fay. So for those that don't know, Morgan Le Fay is one that if you have magical spells, take health from the enemy leaders and give yourself health. So of course, it ends up being another win condition. Outside of Constantine, outside of Giovanni, you can win in multiple different ways. So to that end, a lot of people have done a lot of different ways in building this deck. I tried to make a very basic one, kind of a skeleton bare bones, that at least with this, the world is your oyster in this one, because I have seen Cersei versions of it. I have seen blood offering versions of it. I've seen very heavy into the magical spells with Forbidden Tome. I have seen a very lot of cards with this. The Dr. Fate's helmet, I mean, where it's a buff version of it with magical spells, there is a lot. Energy gives you a lot of options, and even Tyranny gives you a lot of options. Shoot, one of the times I even made a lightning bolt version, so you can have like a fourth win condition with Dr. Zatanna and Eugene Choi. So then that way, hey, if you can't get the other three to work, how about one more? But regardless, it does not matter. There is a lot that you can do with this deck and a lot of cards you can interchange. That really the most consistent thing about it is you try to do magical spells and you both have Ivy and Zatanna. So that is going to be very consistent along with everything else. The key here is if you have a Zatanna Ivy opponent, I would definitely say go for Zatanna first, because magical spells are their engine, and without their engine, they are not going anywhere. If you are able to focus on Zatanna, do that as quickly as you can, because the earlier you are able to kill Zatanna off, the less magical spells they will have in the end game. So with no magical spells, a lot of these cards, Morgan Le Fay, several others, will just not be able to pop off as well as they normally would. And if you're an eagle-eyed person, pay attention to how your opponent is playing. I do plan to make a video in the future that might be some helpful tips to help you out. Here's a free one. When you are facing someone that has magical spells like this, pay attention to are they using their magical spells as soon as they draw them, or are they holding on to their magical spells? Because you can tell if your opponent has some type of combo of magical spells, i.e. like say, if they have Constantine in their hand from like their starting hand, or if they don't, if they start popping off using those magical spells. But if they are holding on to them in multiple different ways, then it's like, okay, more than likely they're trying to get at least a couple of magical spells together. And then when they have all those magical spells, drop down Constantine, drop down Morgan Le Fay, all of those combo oriented ones to pop off and try to kill you in that way. It is one deck that you have to pay the most attention to in how your opponent plays. And like I said, that is a free tip that you can have now. That is something that I analyze and take a look at. So that way you too can be better when facing against a Zatanna Poison Ivy opponent. Now, these last two decks have actually been pretty prevalent on the actual ladder, but they might have died down a little bit due to some recent bugs. So you may not see them as much as you had seen them maybe a few weeks ago, but they were very heavy on the meta, very heavy on the ladder, and still around, and hasn't necessarily disappeared, but they're still here. And these are going to be the last two. First one up, gotta give it up to Raging Panda's Joker Batgirl. He is, if you do not know, Raging Panda is a streamer and content creator for DC Dual Force, and you can definitely find him on Twitch. And this is a deck that he is very much used very often. This has got him into the higher ranks on World's Finest as well. So the one thing about this deck is it is probably the most RNG dependent of everything else. There are going to be games where if you're up against this, sometimes you are just going to lose because RNG was not on your side and Joker hits crazy things. Sometimes Jailbreak will come out and it will pull out some crazy inmates, i.e. like Ventriloquist, into some other cards. And honestly, there a lot of times there's just nothing you can do about it. It's just, that's just the way that CCGs go. But there are going to be times where no matter what happens, Joker misses or Jailbreak misses. So if you do plan to pilot this, If you are prone to rage a lot, be very careful, because there are going to be times, no matter how you play, things just do not hit the way you want them to hit. And there are going to be times where you feel like a god, just hitting everything and destroying everything to your opponent's detriment. So be very careful and be very mindful when playing this one. Regardless, if you are up against Joker and Batgirl, knowing that RNG may or may not be on your side, depending on what you are playing, I honestly would try to go for Batgirl first. Reason being is there are a lot of cards here that combo with Batgirl. If you decide to go for Joker, which I can understand that it does make sense, if you try to kill off Joker first, be very careful of a lot of combo stuff. You are definitely going to be seeing Batgirl work on deploy cards, i.e. Parasite, which having Parasite pop off several times when you believe you have a full board, everything is working for you, there's no way they're going to win, and then next thing you know, they pop down Parasite and they're able to use Batgirl on top of it, and then they also are able to put down Sustained Effort. And here you see this Parasite just suck the living daylights out of your units, and where most of your board is now destroyed, and you have a huge, very swole Parasite to deal with. Be very careful. And also, be very careful with combos like Batgirl and Black Manta. When you think you have a whole lot of health and a big board, next thing you know, you have Manta played, Batgirl procs on him, that's 10 damage to your leader. Sustained Effort, that's 15 damage to your leader, not counting if they have a few units or even Batgirl striking herself. There are some combo pieces here that actually can be an issue, so thus I would suggest going for Batgirl first. She does have the least health pool here, so you might be able to surprise and kill her off quicker than you think, but be very careful. Do not underestimate the fact that, oh, Joker's there, firepower, he's the one I need to kill first. She will be left alone and you'll be thinking that you are safe in the shade, and she comes in and just rains on your parade, and next thing you know, you have lost. But like I said, of course, all matches are different. Be warned though that those are some combos you're definitely going to see, more so than anything else. There's also a lot of other combos here, but I'll leave that for you guys to find out on your own. Now finally, the final deck that I will talk about is going to be this one that I've created myself. Now I'm not sharing this just because it's my video and my deck and I have the privilege to do so. No. I'm actually sharing this because this deck alone has gotten so many people to World's Finest, and is still prevalent seeing Batman and Poison Ivy in the meta. Now, like I said, you may not see it as much in these recent times because there has been some bugs to certain cards to where this deck, which is probably the epitome of a control deck, has not been able to be in the meta because of said bugs. Trust and believe, once things are resolved, you more than likely are going to see this resurge once again. But like I said, as a control deck, it will definitely be able to get you to World's Finest and get you those wins against all these decks that I've actually described. I have actually faced as this deck and have gotten to World's Finest very easily. Now, of course, it might be a slow going because it is a control deck. So thus, if you're playing an aggro deck like Doomsday and Flash, you might be playing more games, but yet you might be losing some games here and there. While this one might be slow, but yet I've very much have shown in a lot of videos how this deck has a very high win rate and will get you to the World's Finest. Regardless of that fact, if you are up against Batman Poison Ivy, honestly, be very careful as far as which ones to go for first. I will definitely say Batman, of course, is a threat. The biggest thing is if this is going to be an opponent that's going to try to control, they are definitely going to try to get Batmobile to do that spike damage, because you don't necessarily need to have a whole lot of batarangs or gadgets and such to get that Batmobile to be the crazy like 12 damage, crazy 15 damage. No, use Batmobile sparingly, because the fact is, having Batmobile early, playing it early, you're able to attack for 3 to whatever you want on the board as many times as you want. And then of course, if they attack for 3, then every other turn they're able to attack for 6 as well. So over time, Batmobile will definitely give you that victory. But that's just one win condition in this deck that has so many others in it. So be very careful when playing up against a control deck. Of course, if you are playing mid-range, if you're playing aggro, then you're going to want to try to surprise, do as much damage as possible. But if they end up having the cards to control the board, then there's nothing you can do about it. My father-son deck, which is named that because I made this deck right after the introduction of Flashpoint Batman. So I thought, oh, you know, father with son. Needless to say, this is definitely going to be a very good deck and get you the world's finest, which has been proven by a lot of testimonials and a lot of different people. So take it with a grain of salt. If this is your goal to get the world's finest, then try this one out. But it does belong in this list. Trust me, I'm not doing it just because. So there you have it, 6 decks that more or less is going to be in this meta, maybe more so than others, maybe due to buffs, nerfs, bugs. You might see a little bit more, you might see a little bit less, but trust me when I say, right now we are in a very diverse meta. So there are a lot of different decks out there. There are a lot of different aggro lists, mid-range lists, even control lists that are actually good right now that I didn't showcase, but we shall see how things turn out in maybe another month's time. And I will try to make this a regular video as far as giving you guys a meta report on what you may or may not see in the meta and what to look out for, and as far as different strategies you may want to employ when facing up against these decks. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, make sure you guys are subscribed, and comment down below. Has any of these decks got you the world's finest, or what have you been seeing? We'll definitely discuss more about this in the future. And of course, you can hit me up and see me on my Twitch channel, Analyze It Gaming, and as well as more videos here as we cover more DC Dual Force meta, strategies, decks, cards. Make sure you guys tune in here first. Stay safe, be careful, and Lord willing, I will see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon.